thank you again for being here today, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Abigail Giles, and I'm the Eastern Regional Chair for the National Science Policy Network, and also a PhD student in the NIH Oxford Cambridge Scholars Program. And today we're fortunate to be speaking with the NIH Office of Science Policy about federal coordination of biomedical research policy. The event is going to be divided into two sections, and each section will begin with a few moderated questions, but the session is going to be largely audience Q&A based. So if you could please take a moment to turn on your cameras and try to actively engage throughout the session, that would be really great. During the first half of today's event, we will be speaking with Dr. Lyric Jorgensen, Acting NIH Associate Director for Science Policy. During the second half of today's event, we will be speaking with Dr. Miriam Akeju, who is a AAAS STPF with the Science Policy Coordination, Collaborating, and Reporting Division of NIH OSP, and Dr. Ryan Donohue, a Health Science Policy Analyst with the Biosafety, Biosecurity, and Emerging Biotechnology Division of the OSP, and also a past AAAS STPF with the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So thank you to the speakers for being here today. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lyric Jorgensen. As I mentioned, Dr. Jorgensen is the Acting NIH Associate Director for Science Policy. And in this position, she provides senior leadership in the development and oversight of cross-cutting biomedical research policies and programs considered to be of high priority to NIH and the United States government. Give me 1 second. So we're going to get started. And thank you again, Dr. Jorgensen, for being here with us today. Can we start? Can I ask you to please just introduce yourself and tell us how you came to NIH and the NIH Office of Science Policy?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me join your group today. I am pleased to be here. As mentioned, my name is Lyric Jorgensen. Please feel free to call me Lyric. I am both the Acting Associate Director for Science Policy, and I also run the Office of Science Policy, which are kind of two interrelated but distinct roles. I have been at NIH for a little over a decade now, also part of what we often refer to as the AAAS S&T Mafia. Was in that program in 2008, 2009, after receiving a postdoc and PhD from the University of Minnesota in developmental neuroscience. And so early on in my tenure working in neuroscience, this happens to a lot of neuroscientists, getting really interested about how policy and the brain and the intersection of social factors all come together to really develop good policy for not only our health, but how we use that information to inform the conduct of science.
Well, thanks for that introduction. And I was wondering if you could just give everyone kind of a brief background about the NIH Office of Science Policy and discuss the structure and function of the office.
Absolutely. And this was news to me. I remember being a grad student. And again, I find many grad students are far more savvy than I was at the time, but we'll pretend that you are me at that stage, when I thought the NIH was just a bank that paid the bills to do research. NIH is a much broader organization with lots of interesting roles in the global S&T enterprise. So it is the world's largest funder of biomedical research, which is very exciting and cool. It makes us to be able to really have the position to influence not only science, but also policy around science. So as the director of the office and the lead advisor for biomedical research in the government, I really work alongside my team to conceptualize and implement a strategic vision along with the associated priorities and kind of outcome deliverables to advance responsible research to improve human health. And so that's really important because there's many components of science policy. One is to make sure that the science can move at the pace needed to be able to make important cures and transformations, but also we need to remember that we are being paid by the taxpayer, and taxpayers' interest and commitment to how research is funded is very important. So our office really works at that intersection, which is why you'll see PhDs, lawyers, medical doctors, bioethicists, and more all come together to really bring into focus how to spend NIH's money in the most responsible fashion. We have about 5 thematic divisions, and you'll meet some of our team today because biomedical research policy is huge. It is everything from the big stuff like how we share our data and how we make sure that research results get to the public, how we protect human subjects, or we would say human participants in research, to make sure that we are doing that in a way that upholds their autonomy and privacy. But also there are some interesting niche areas that really are really high impact. Again, you'll hear from some of our team today about, for instance, biosecurity. We've heard a lot of work about if you support really potentially dangerous pathogens, how do we make sure that's done responsibly so that we don't start a pandemic? And at the same token, we can allow this research to continue so that we get effective flu vaccine every year. So it really does cover that gamut. Our team works both within the NIH to be able to work across the scientists that work at NIH, with the extramural community, all the people that are represented here, working with your institutions and your teams. And we also work internationally and across the US government to advance biomedical research policy positions to really advance, again, those kind of considerations.
Well, thank you for highlighting the role of the NIH and kind of the broader biomedical research enterprise in the US. And not to go back to this too much, but you pointed out that the NIH is a significant funder of biomedical research. Does your office have any relation to the NIH budget or any budgetary processes?
Absolutely. So we are integral into a lot of the effort. Well, one, we do have our own operating budget, and we actually do fund some research. We have a $5 million that we invest in bioethics research every year. And that's really the effort. Let me back up for a second. The NIH is a big place. It sounds like a university, but it's just like a university where we have very discrete parts. So it's 27 institutes and centers. Probably some of you are familiar with that they're disease-focused center institutes like National Cancer Institute, or aging, which is not a disease, life stage. And then you also have some general resource institutes like general medical sciences, or organ focus, heart, lung, blood, right? So there's all of these different types of institutes. Our team sits in the office of the director. So we sit as kind of an umbrella organization across all of those institutes to be able to have a standard approach to being able to have policy integrated in science. So we develop policy that affects all of our institutes, which means also policy work, as we have all painfully learned. You can't just develop a policy without resources, right? Whatever policy we tell you, if we say we need you all to use purple nitrile gloves, well, that means changing which gloves you're using. Somebody's got to pay for that. You already have a lifetime supply of blue ones. Terrible example. But so we work very closely to think about the budget implications of our policies to make sure that they're implementable, or allow our institutions to ask for more money to be able to support that culture change. We also work closely with our legislative policy components, which is a little bit of nuance in our budget office. Our team writes the narrative to Congress, highlighting the importance of NIH research, why investing in our research is important, what you get out of it. And so we usually write that narrative along with our congressional folks and the budget team, who then plunks in budget numbers for all that stuff costs. So it's a very big machine integrating all of these important components. Because again, policy can't work without implementation. Implementation can't work without resources and infrastructure. So they all have to kind of be together in a cohesive vision.
Yeah, and thank you for highlighting that you're not only interfacing with the federal government, but you're also interfacing with the many, many institutes that make up the NIH. So that's a very huge role. So can you please highlight some of the current policy priorities of your office and maybe some of the most exciting ongoing projects?
Absolutely. I'll save some of them for the team as well, because they will be able to tell you about some of the fun stuff. We have been spending a lot of time on some of the work in data sharing. So some of the part that we do here at NIH is make sure that the taxpayers get something out of what they invest in, right? Whether that be new products, access to knowledge, stimulate the economy. Those are all important components, right? So one of the things we're really working on is making sure that the research that we support gets into the hands of the public. So we've implemented a new data management and sharing policy, which took us roughly 10 years to do. Everyone thinks it's like, what took you so long? Well, we can talk about why it took us so long, because bringing the community along and getting the resources together was really imperative. But so data sharing and access to scholarly publications are big topics and part of our house. Another topic of importance for us is really thinking about emerging technologies. One of the toughest challenges I find in policy making is it is easy to make a policy after something is broken. Like you see something is broken and you go, oh, let's fix it. That's common sense. How do you figure out where technology is going to go and then put in place a policy that lets it move forward? So I think CRISPR is a really good example here. We'd had gene editing for the longest time. We had policies in place for gene editing. Everything seemed fine. All of a sudden, CRISPR comes on the table, and we're like, well, it's still gene editing. People have been doing that, but now many more scientists can do this, and scientists are editing embryos and implanting them in people. There's all these kind of things that we have to be able to anticipate where the technology is going to lay the rules of the road. Gene editing is one. We just got back from the International Summit on Gene Editing, thinking about how to let that technology move forward in a responsible fashion. And another big area that we've been really working hard on is thinking about how to engage people as partners in research, not only because it increases trust in research to be able to have that transparency, but also because there's important partnerships to be made in thinking about the research we fund. And a more tangible example of that is, a scientist designs a study based on the endpoints relevant to the study, right? But patients want a study that has endpoints meaningful to them. So you might care about blood pressure and you might care about body mass, but the person might care about waking up and being able to get out of bed without having their feet hurt or something to that effect, right? So how do we design a study where both people win out and being able to share that information for both mutual value? So those are some of the areas that we've been thinking really hard and trying to drive policy aims at. We have a huge portfolio in biosecurity and scientific integrity, which my colleagues here today can talk to you about in more detail. So I will not steal their thunder, which I tend to do if you let me ramble too long.
Well, thank you for sharing. I guess I just have one follow-up question to one of the projects that you pointed out. But in terms of data sharing and providing information to the public about the NIH outputs and NIH research, what types of products are being consumed? What types of deliverables are being consumed by the general public that are easiest for them to understand what types of research is being conducted, and how does your office make sure that those deliverables are accessible to the public?
Well, I'll give you two little bit of polar examples. One is a more practical, useful example is clinical research, right? So we have a database where all studies that are funded by NIH need to register their studies. So you need to say, I'm doing a clinical research study with these endpoints, and it goes into this database so that the world can see, and my study results have to go there, right? And so scientists can look at that and say, oh, I see the study was done. I can learn from this. Importantly, it does not require a study to be published, because let's be honest, not every study gets published, and it doesn't mean it's not a good study just because it doesn't get published. We all know null results are very important. And when it comes to involving human people, we don't want to waste their time and energy on studies that don't work, or even worse, are dangerous. So making that transparent so scientists know where the path before them has been and can inform their work, critically important. At the same time, patients are like, wait a minute, you have a whole you have a whole database on all of these studies. I want in. How do you make that accessible for me so I can look through all those studies and figure out ones I might match with so I can engage in clinical research and be part of your study? So that is in one way where the scientists and public are trying to interface to be able to have that shared goal. Another example we've been taking on, and this is a new effort in our office, is how do we engage the public in really kind of thorny questions and be really transparent about it. So we've been thinking about how new technologies like mobile health devices or social media, how all of those data are being mined and combined with research studies to make real world and precision medicine kind of reality. But we really want to understand what people think about that. So we have taken a country roadshow, going in communities across the country, working with community liaisons. We had our first Spanish speaking event in Harlem. We've been to rural Mississippi and more to try to gain real insight into what people across the country and different communities think about research. How do they hear what we're communicating to them? And how do we translate what we're doing in a way that is understandable and meaningful for them so that they can then tell us what they think about it? Because that's the hardest part. You hear how fast I talk and how complex the topics can be. How do we translate that into something people feel like listening to instead of watching, Instagram videos of dogs, versus actually engaging in the policymaking process. So that's something we are really trying to take on here at NIH, because again, understanding what actual people think about our policy efforts is really critical, just as much as the scientists.
Well, it's really exciting to hear about those community engagement initiatives because they're super important. I'll ask one more question and then I'll open it up to audience Q&A. But broadly, can you please discuss how biomedical research and health policy is coordinated across the federal government, and what is the role of the NIH OSP?
Man, well, I am going to not pretend it's easy. The federal government's a big place. And as I mentioned, the federal government is only one component of a broader ecosystem that involves the private sector and companies and researchers. And researchers are not a monolith itself. There's late stage, early stage, all these kind of components, patients, members of the public. So it is not the easiest thing to do, but we have worked really hard to figure out how to leverage our collective expertise. And again, both myself and Dr. Donohue were down at the White House for a while and really saw how this happens at a higher level, where there's a lot of convenings. It's kind of a government joke. Let's have a meeting. It's actually a really important skill and ability to convene a useful and productive meeting. When we first got here, I don't know about the rest of my team, but when I first got here, like, hey, you need to make an agenda. And I'm like, I didn't go to science school to make agendas, people. The agenda really is how you shape a conversation to get an outcome. And part of that is this collaboration, coordination, negotiation of pain points. And so we spend lots of times in meetings because we've got to bring all these different groups together to hear where they are, where they need to be, where we are, where we need to be, and how to kind of combine these deliverables. So in some cases, the agencies go on their own way. They say, this is a priority for us, not a priority for you. We're going to chart our own path. But there are many areas in which there's strength in numbers. For instance, one of the things that we worked on, again, when Dr. Donohue was at the White House, was how do we put together a good characteristics of a data repository, right? Like there's data repositories proliferating by the dozen. How do we establish a good characteristic? Seems simple enough, but it'd be really annoying if NIH said, okay, use these repositories. And then NS said, you use these repositories. You guys don't care. You just don't care. You just say, tell me the repository. And it'd be really nice if my funders agreed on that, so I didn't have to waste my time searching that out. So those are the kind of things that we really try to work together to not confuse the universe, because we are chaotic. So they sound kind of like, really, that's how you spend your day, but it is so important to be able to provide that consistency for the people who use our resources.
Well, thank you for speaking to that. I think sometimes when I think about the NIH, I never consider the private sector, but there is a huge relationship, obviously, between the NIH and biomedical research, and then how that's translated into commercial products or medicine. So that's super important work as well. So I'm gonna finish there and open it up to audience Q&A. I believe we have 10 more minutes with Dr. Jorgensen. So please introduce yourself, turn on your camera, and ask any questions you may have. Go ahead, Miles.
So hi, I'm Miles. I'm a first year PhD student in bioengineering at UPenn. I just want to say, first of all, thanks for being here today. And then I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about how NIH communicates with sort of the rest of the scientific community, like both academia and private companies, when it's considering a major policy change, especially in the context of like the data sharing changes you mentioned, like the publication changes that are currently underway. I'd love to hear more details about that.
Absolutely. And so this is something we're really thinking hard about. How do we change the way we do this or modernize the way we do this, given the technologies we have at our disposal, sorry. The simplest, most routine way so first of all, NIH is not a regulatory agency, so we don't have to go through traditional rulemaking like some agencies do. And traditional rulemaking is a little more complex, but we try to adhere to that process as much as possible because it's a good one. So what we typically do when we are developing a new policy is we will put out a notice saying, hey guys, we're thinking about a new policy. Here are the pieces we're thinking will be involved. What do you think? And then that will be out for public comment. We will get comments, we'll analyze them, we'll update our policy. There might be a few more iterations, and then we'll put out a final. So that's one of the ways we do it is putting this out through a Federal Register notice, or a guide notice. Now, I'm guessing a good share of you just said, I don't know what a Federal Register notice. And of course you don't. And that's the problem with some of the policy making process. We do have a standard process to make it equitable. Anyone can access that. Anyone can weigh in if you're a person who trolls the Federal Register. So that's what we're trying to solve right now is how, okay, so we've democratized the process that anyone can participate if you're aware, but how do we actually engage people into a meaningful conversation? And that's what we're really working on now. So we write blogs and we work with stakeholder groups, and especially like scientific societies are really amazing here. So they work with your institutions and help get the word out and get you engaged. We try to do as many talks as possible to say, hey, we're thinking about, that's why the data sharing policy took 10 years. It was not because we were eating bonbons, it's because we were traveling the country, every single move saying, and today we added a page, and today we thought about this. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Because to get it right, you need that constant iterative process development. So we use these processes. We also, again, try to amplify our message and use our communities as ambassadors. So again, FASEB or Society for Neuroscience or any of those societies, we are in constant contact with them so that they reach out to their communities, and they and patient advocacy groups. We also work with organizations in the private sector who are similar, right? So there's an umbrella organization for bio, there's an umbrella organization for pharma, there's an umbrella organization for small businesses. So in some, those tend to be the best reach to get the word out there. But the public comment process is extremely important. And you'll see with all of our policies, usually there'll be this terribly long preamble. And the preamble is all telling you what we heard from the public and how we responded to it. So you can see very transparently when you weigh in what we did with that information. So that's our goal, is to be as nobody's ever going to like 100% what you do, but you have to be faithful to the process to be able to stand behind the decision making.
That makes sense. Thank you.
And now you will troll your Federal Register on Friday nights while you are having your evening beverage.
I've already been trying to do that a little bit, but it's a work in progress.
Does anyone else have any questions? I see one hand up. Abigail.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Abby Boyd. I'm an ORISE postdoctoral fellow at USDA ARS in Beltsville, Maryland. And my question is kind of about how different agencies within the federal government interact and coordinate. It's been my observation that we have a lot of shared priorities in a lot of things, even, ARS and NIH. And it seems challenging to make sure that we are coordinated but not redundant in certain things. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that at all.
Oh my gosh, it's an excellent question. And so on one hand, we do have these formal mechanisms. It's really the beauty of having, the auspices of the federal government and the White House, who really serves as a convener for federal priorities. By and large, a lot of the other ways is we establish lesser formal mechanisms and informal mechanisms as well. So for instance, NIH, because we have so many related kind of ties with, NIH science, if it just sits on a shelf, it doesn't do any good. It needs to go through regulatory approval and reimbursement by CMS. So how do we streamline that? So we've just set up our own joint leadership council where the leaders meet routinely to say, where are our big sticky wickets? What do we need to be putting in place so that we can be better coordinated on the same page? So those are some of the mechanisms. I honestly find some of the best mechanisms, and this is my best advice for anyone who wants to get into science policy, is the world does become small. The network of people is so valuable. So again, Miriam and Ryan, we work together in other kind of venues. And then at some point in time, we work together in the office and these relationships go, I know who I need to call at EPA. They're going to know this answer. We should coordinate. We should connect. And so I find that the government stewards are really interested in not being redundant because frankly, there's not enough resources to do so. So making these connections and forming these collaborations just from the connections is really one of the strongest mechanisms.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jens.
Thank you. My name is Jens. I used to be a cell biologist. Now I work in science policy for a German research organization.
You can still be a cell biologist and a science
at heart. That's right. At heart, I am. Thank you. I was wondering what your interactions with policymakers are, specifically with Congress. So who in Congress is interested in science policy for health research? If you'd like, I'd also be interested in hearing how the perceived polarization in US politics is affecting your work.
You've heard that? So the good news is science policy and health policy, I do believe, is a bipartisan issue. I believe you find interested parties on both sides of the aisle. So it does keep us really engaged with our partners on the Hill here. I have found them to be incredibly thoughtful and especially interested in learning how we do support not only cures and treatments for the public, but also the return on the taxpayer's investment by generating, again, NIH's money, 80% of NIH's almost $50 billion goes to researchers across the country. We are stimulating the economy. The administration just released a big executive order on the bioeconomy, right? Because it's such an important driver. So we interact quite frequently with our friends on the Hill, and even with those who are less friendly on the Hill, because it's really important to get the facts out there about what science can tell us, what science can't tell us, and how, you know, any potential policy might affect the conduct of science. So I would say it is a pretty strong relationship that NIH has with members on the Hill, and I think it's one that we are extremely grateful for.
All right, well, I think in the interest of time, we're probably just going to conclude there, but I'd like to say thank you again for being here with us today and offering some of your time to help us kind of understand the NIH Office of Science Policy and your role, and for offering your insights. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, and you will have fun with our team. These guys are just really whiz bang at their work, so they'll give you more insight, Scoot.
Okay, and so, give me 1 second. So as I mentioned, we're now going to be speaking with Dr. Miriam Akeju, who's a AAAS STPF with the Science Policy Coordination, Collaborating and Reporting Division of NIH OSP, and Dr. Ryan Donohue, a Health Science Policy Analyst with the Biosafety, Biosecurity, and Emerging Biotechnology Division of NIH OSP, and a past AAAS STPF with the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So thank you both for being here with us today. And again, we're going to start with a few moderated questions, and then we're going to open up the floor to audience Q&A. So first, I was wondering if you could please just introduce yourself and tell us how you came to NIH and the Office of Science Policy.
Sure.
Yep, go ahead.
I'll go first. Is that okay, Miriam? Okay. Right. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate it. I love speaking with policy folks who maybe aren't in the government yet. Maybe they will be, maybe not. We'll see. So to spare you all the early details, I'll maybe just start in my PhD. So I got my PhD at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota in 2019. Studied measles virus. I'm a virologist by training. I think probably like many of you, we seek to have more impact beyond the bench. That's why I think all of you are here today. And policy making comes more naturally to me, I think, or at least science communication, things like that come more naturally than actually doing the bench work. And I don't know what that says about me, but you know, a few key moments throughout my PhD, I think, turn that table somewhat. Some advocacy and outreach events on the Hill, particularly through AAAS. There's also an event called Hill Day, where I helped represent the American Society of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. And a lot of these events are things like crash courses in science policy and you know, learning about the federal budget, things like that. And then in the end, you get to go on the Hill and advocate for your issue. And so very energizing to me, sort of realize that my skills landed more there than on the bench. And so with that, I think, you know, other issues kept arising with my research. So I'm a measles virus researcher. We can eradicate measles, like it can be eradicated. We have a vaccine that works. If enough people took it, it could be gone, but it's not, right? It's not really the bench scientists' fault. They did their side of the piece, right? So it's things like social and behavioral scientists to be able to share, or you don't use the word convince, but promotes trust in the science in institutions to uptake vaccines and things like that, and we could eradicate. So I think with that, and of course with the wake of the pandemic, trust again exacerbated, distrust in scientists. Partly, I think we could have done a lot better as scientists, but partly there was campaigns that were seeking to increase that distrust and things like that. And so those are kind of the things that led me into science policy in general. So in 2020, did the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship for 2 years. Was in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. So I was there from 2020 to 2022. Worked on issues related to scientific trust. So public access to federally funded research. We already heard a little bit about that. So publications and data, surely, but other pieces of research results as well. Scientific integrity, so helping to eliminate political interference, undue influence in science. Research security is another issue on safeguarding our R&D enterprise from foreign exploitation. And so did the 2 years there, and then again, an inkling in me, there was more to trust than just these issues. Things like biosafety and biosecurity became sort of in the forefront. Again, another thing exacerbated by the pandemic, and things that the public wanted answers to, are things like transparency and assurance that we are doing our research safely and securely. And so I found myself at NIH in September of this past year, working on those issues. And so I can, now that we're got to NIH, I'll pause there.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Miriam Akeju. I am a current AAAS Fellow in the office. So I'm going to start like Ryan did for my grad years. So I got my PhD at Hopkins. And while I was at Hopkins, I realized that a lot of the things that I enjoyed doing were things outside the lab. So I was president of our Biomedical Scholars Association. I was a representative on our Graduate Students Association, which created policies that were pertinent to my fellow grad students. I did Fun with Science Days with kids to teach them about science and how it's important and how science is all around us. Science education is very near and dear to my heart. I learned that you could have a career in science policy through a diverse careers in science panel. And so from that experience, I just kind of sought out other experiences that I could have learning about science policy and what that means. So one of the things I did was the AAAS case workshop, which is catalyzing and advancing science and engineering workshop. It's like a 2-day workshop. I learned that there's a difference between, science for policy and policy for science. From there, I sought out more experiences. So as a grad student, I actually was a Miriam Fellow. I'm in my last year of grad school. So I was in their Policy and Global Affairs division, in the division of, on the board of higher education and workforce. And so I got to work on a consensus study. And if you know the national academies, they are pretty famous for putting out recommendations that other organizations or agencies will use. So the consensus study that I worked on was supporting the whole student, higher well-being, substance abuse, mental health, substance abuse, and well-being in higher education. And I really wanted from point forward to figure out how an institution takes recommendations that come from another organization and actually implements them. And so that was one of the reasons why I decided to apply for AAAS. I want to be at a federal government agency to figure out how they could take recommendations and implement. And so one of the reasons why I decided to join NIH, the Office of Science Policy, was for that reason. The Office of Science Policy gives you a really high-level overview of what's happening at NIH. Because we're the purveyors of all of the policy work that is going on at NIH. From the 27 ICs and institutions, it's a federated system. So we're the office that needs to know and coordinate what's happening in the ICs, but what's also happening at NIH with other federal agencies. So that's kind of how I got into science policy.
Well, thank you both for sharing a little bit about your path, and I think it probably sounds familiar to where some of us are in our career. I know that Miles, I think you just attended the case workshop, and I think people are exploring the Miriam and the AAAS, so it's really cool to hear about your transition between each of those opportunities. Can you please kind of introduce what do you do in your current role, and what are the priorities of your unique divisions within NIH OSP?
Well, yeah, I can start there. So, right. So issues that I work on are related to biosafety and biosecurity. And so, biosafety being things like containment and accidental exposure to, laboratory accidents, things, biological materials and things like that. And biosecurity, the potential misuse or release, intentional release of biological materials, pathogens, and stuff like that. And so, one major issue that we're working on right now is actually, Lyric briefly mentioned it, is helping to implement the bioeconomy executive order. And so this was an executive order that was released last summer from the Biden-Harris administration to essentially direct agencies to bolster biotechnology and biomanufacturing across essentially every life sciences sector. So not only just health, but also climate, supply chain, food, all that sort of thing. And so a lot of provisions within there. And so with sort of these advancements comes the need to do this in a safe and secure way, right? And so one of the provisions in there is for us at NIH to lead the creation of an innovation initiative on biosafety and biosecurity. And so essentially this is a collective of actions and priorities and investments that the US government can do both individually and together to essentially bolster biosafety and biosecurity across the US government. So things like investing in more applied biosafety research, incentives to enhance best practices in biosafety and biosecurity. And so these are things that US government can do, but it's supposed to trigger sort of this global, fervor of more increase in biosafety and biosecurity. Of course, we do this with the notion that this shouldn't really compromise or at least wrongfully compromise, the progress of technology and things that we enjoy today, especially in this country. So, so I'm helping to lead that interagency process. There are things like a public plan that will be released, and then sort of some oversight on implementing these investments. And so that's one major thing we're working on. Another is things like updating policies that have been, that need updating from maybe they existed a decade ago. Things like, what do we do when a researcher is working with a pathogen that might have a dual use, something that could be harmful? Like, how do we govern or regulate, or should we do that, and at what level? And so they're very complex issues, involving that, again, to make sure we're not stifling research, but again, that these are done responsibly. So other issues, things like, what do we do when a researcher orders synthetic nucleotides from a company and they happen to have sequences of concern? Is that okay for us? Are we okay letting that go unregulated, or should we have some protections or measures in place to sort of safeguard against that? So again, all of these are kind of policy committees and things like that. Some of them are NIH centric, but some of them are across, the relevant departments and agencies across the federal government. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there as a few issues, and we can talk more about those if you want.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of what my division does. So I like to think of my division, which is the Science Policy Coordination, Collaboration, and Reporting Division, as a little microcosm of what OSP does in general. And so my division really focuses on coordinating, like the name says, it's very on point. Coordinating and collaborating with stakeholders, and those stakeholders include not only stakeholders outside of NIH, so that means other federal government agencies, the White House, institutions that you all probably are at, scientific organization, private, public-private partnerships. It's a multitude of things, but it also includes coordinating with the rest of NIH. And so we have a portfolio that consists of doing those things. So I will speak about myself for just a moment. So I am in charge of leading and co-leading all of the things that are White House related. So the National Science and Technology Council, I keep track of the activities that are happening there. The President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, I keep track of anything that's happening in that space. Sorry, I told Abby that I was under the weather today, so I'm kind of spacey, but forgive me. So that's White House stuff. Another part of that my division works on is National Academies contracts. So we work with NASM on contracts with NIH ICs, so the institutes and centers, any contracts that they're interested in doing. We also work with the Foundation for NIH, which is responsible. It's the only mechanism we have for engaging in public and private partnerships. We work with the Government Accountability Office. So making sure that if there are any requests for additional information, that we are providing them with that information. We do a lot of legislative work. So we review a lot of congressional justifications, technical assistances, et cetera, that may come into the office that need to go also out. And we do that in partnership with the Office of Legislative Policy Analyst, OPA. So for my particular work, so I work on all things related to the White House. I also have the pleasure of working on our scientific integrity update. So Ryan gave you a brief overview of the work that he did while he was at the White House. Well, now we are trying to actually put those recommendations to use at NIH. So how do you actually take a framework that is created by the White House and put it to use? What does that look like for a policy that we already have? Well, how do we better improve our policy by incorporating certain elements from the framework to strengthen what we already have? And that involves going out to stakeholders. So that involves going out to the scientific community and figuring out, will this policy work? Will it be effective? Because you can make policies all you want, but policies are ineffective if nobody uses them. And that's just point blank period. And so really wanting to know how effective our policies will be requires engaging with people outside of our office. So I feel like a lot of what I do is engaging with not only the subject matter experts in our office, so like Ryan on bioeconomy information, our folks in our clinical healthcare and research policy division on human participants. It involves us reaching out to scientific communities and figuring out what is going to work. So, Lyric spoke about how 80% of NIH funding goes out to the extramural research community. Well, 20% also goes out to the intramural research community, and figuring out what do the researchers here at NIH also need, and how do we incorporate all of those needs into an effective policy? That is one thing I'm really excited about doing is a workshop with Lyric. Actually, it's called On Leading a Lab. We're doing that through the National Academies. And so we're in the process of putting it together. And it's supposed to be a guide for senior researchers to figure out how to better balance all of the different responsibilities they have when leading a lab. So not only from mentorship to making sure that your lab is actually going through with regulations, you know how to balance your budget and keep all your budget information together, but like really thinking about the other things that go on with keeping and producing a successful lab. And one of the reasons why I was really interested in that is because as a grad student, you know, you see your PI as, you see one facet of your PI, which is they're there to mentor you, but there are other facets of them where I feel like they get pulled in a lot of different directions that don't always seem to be beneficial to the scientific enterprise or to their students who they're trying to mentor. And so trying to figure out how to better balance those responsibilities and to give them a guide in order to do so. And then scientific integrity. So scientific integrity I'm doing in partnership. So I have a lot of different things in scientific integrity that I'm doing. So I actually sit as exec sec for subcommittee on scientific integrity within the White House. And so we are going to be looking at all the federal agencies' updates or their new generated policies that are supposed to increase or further scientific integrity. And we're really thinking about how do you make sure that, you know, science is done with objectivity, with honesty. How do we communicate science in a way that remains honest and objective? How do we manage science? How do we fund science with those principles? So it has been a really interesting and fun process for me to see how we go from creating, well, actually, NIH had a scientific integrity policy in 2012, but you can imagine that from 2012 to now, there have been a lot of different changes. And so we've needed to update our policy. And so figuring out what are the things, what are the gaps, what are the best practices, what do we want to include? This has been like a very interesting and fun process for me. Yes, so I'll just say that. I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you for sharing. It sounds like you both have very diverse roles, even in your, positions. And it sounds like they're both very dynamic since, policy priorities are always changing, or biosecurity threats or issues are always changing. So thank you so much for shedding some light on that. I'm going to go ahead and open the floor to audience Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please just unmute yourself and go ahead and introduce yourself and ask away. And if nope, oh, go ahead, Miles.
Yeah, I can go again. I actually had sort of a different question for each of you, Ryan and Miriam. For Ryan, you said you were at OSTP from 2020 to 2022. So I was wondering what it was like being in the same office during a transition between two very different administrations. And then for Miriam, I guess as someone who's currently kind of torn between like PhD work and interest in science policy, how did you balance the things you were doing outside the lab with what you had to do for your PhD studies while you were at Hopkins?
Yeah, no, great question, Miles, and good to see you. He was at the AAAS case workshop presenting last week or 2 weeks ago. So yeah, that's a great question. Probably best discussed over beers, but we can talk a little bit about that now. So first of all, I'll just say it was difficult to make that decision to join during the last administration. I'll just bluntly say that. I'm not a political, or at least I don't project that political nature in the work that I do. But it was clear that science was sidestepped during the last administration, and making the decision to join was one that I took did not take lightly. I'll say that. So, but nevertheless, I think the thing that pushed me over the edge was even if I can't be effective, at least I can learn how things happen there. So, and as it happens, there was a transition. And was able to see essentially the office disintegrate. Well, that's dramatic. It didn't disintegrate, but it did shrink down from maybe like 50 people to 20 or so, maybe 10 or less were working on policy, and then basically getting rebuilt from scratch. And now it's over 100. So what that did was it allowed me the pleasure of being able to choose what portfolio I wanted. There were a lot of ongoing priorities that continued through administration that needed bodies to do that. Me being fresh, no policy experience really, a AAAS first year AAAS Fellow, usually doesn't get that kind of responsibility, but they needed people to do it. And so I think I was able to get some leadership positions that maybe if you come into the White House now, you may not be able to get for some time. And so I think I leveraged and took advantage of that. And then I think the second thing too was, again, because as the population, as the office started getting populated again, I had a couple months on people who weren't there yet, and we had already started to establish process and things like, oh, how do you get this paper cleared through the front office, or what's the best way to actually engage with the public? Is it through a request for information? Is it through listening sessions and things like that? And so, having a few months I was able to sort of set up or establish a lot of those, and a lot of those are still things that are used today. So what that also did was it gave trust in my colleagues, because they would then lean on me and talk to me and say, how did you guys do this, and things like that. So when my policy chops still weren't strong yet, at least I could add that asset to it. So that's kind of like personally what was going on. Issues, they changed too. I mean, I think it was a scramble in the beginning to learn what the Biden-Harris administration's priorities and issues were. And so there were a few key things that we knew were going to be. I wasn't privy to the transition team materials, so I was learning a lot of it as you were on a daily basis. But things like President Biden wrote a letter to the former director, the first director that we had, Eric Lander, outlining a few key priorities. And so, what we did was we grabbed those, and any issues that we wanted to advance, we figured out a way to relate those issues to these broader Biden-Harris administration issues. And so I think a lot of the first few months were setting up those sort of micro priorities based on the larger priorities. And so, and then running with those, like for instance, the public access, OSTP public access policy memo that eliminated the embargo, that made publications of data freely available, that was released last August. I was happy to be a part of that and help co-lead that. Well, the angle there was not the angle, I mean, that sounds disingenuous, but, one thing that we wanted to highlight was, this new policy will deliver research equitably. Equity is a huge component. And so leaning on that strongly was a sure thing way to, make sure that priority and that policy was seen from the front office of the White House. Things like, the cancer moonshot that the Biden-Harris administration prioritizes. The president always talks about data sharing of patient information, things like that. So we were able to leverage again that priority to advance our policies. So I'll stop there because I know I can ramble on. So anyway, sorry, Miriam, please.
Yeah, of course. So I'm just going to restate your question. It was on how I balanced my time in grad school between the things in the lab and things out of the lab. I think balance is the key word. There is no balance, let's be real, okay? You do what you need to do when you need to do it. So when things are, I was one of those people who pulled really late nights in lab. I just like being in lab when no one else was there because I felt like I got a lot of work done. But during the day, I would spend a lot of time in and out of lab. So like just having really frank conversations with your mentor, like these are the things that are priorities for me and that I want to do, and making sure that they're on board with those things. I think if my mentor at the time was not on board with a lot of the things that I wanted to do outside the lab, I would have ran into a lot more issues. So like, I think just having like really, communicating. I think the biggest thing is communicating with your mentor. I don't think I had a real balance. I'm just going to be very honest with you. But I did all the things that brought me joy, and also, finished my PhD strongly. So, and that was important to me because that's what I got my PhD to do. So I'll just leave it there.
Great. Thank you both.
I guess in the interest of time, I'm sure we have many more questions, but maybe I could ask you to both kind of answer this last question. What advice would you give early career scientists that are interested in pursuing science policy careers?
I'll go first because it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, because I'm in my second year of my fellowship right now. And so I'm thinking about what my next steps are. And so in doing so, I've been really trying to focus on what are the things that bring me joy in the work that I do right now? What are the skills that I really enjoy partaking in? So I realized that I really like to think high level. I don't like to be in the weeds on anything. I like to give high level overview. I like people to give me information and then to give it back to leadership in a way that is concise and clear and that they can use. And it's one of the things that I really love about my job. I love the fact that I'm able to dab in a bunch of different areas. So the subject doesn't really matter to me. It's the ability to take that information. So I would say for you all in, the stages of your career where you are at, figure out what are the skills that you think you want to gain? What are the skills you have that you want to continue to build? And find the things that bring you joy. So yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, that's great. Now I'll give you one that is absolutely essential. It's communication. So actually being able to disseminate complex information into easily digestible bites is very important on a daily, an hourly, minutely basis where we're working. Things like preparing briefings and things for the our higher ups, but also for communicating to the public. So there are plenty of other ones to do, but that's one. I will say, and some other advice is, well, first of all, you're already doing it by having this network. I think Lyric talked about in the government, networking agency to agency. You're already doing that right now, and you'll find that you'll see some of you folks later down the road as well. So keep engaging like that. Keep talking to people like Miriam and me and many others. Every conversation you have with them, ask who else can you talk with. So I think just gaining that sort of awareness of who's out there and what what sort of things are out there is really important. And also federal government is not the only place for policy. There are plenty of other opportunities too. So don't just limit yourself to this. But I'm biased right now, so we'd love to have you.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing about your experiences and giving us some insights into the work that you're doing and how you got there. So huge thanks. And thanks to all the participants for joining today. And we'll conclude there. And I hope that everyone has a good day.